Hello, everyone. The focus of this lecture is going to be on writing, and specifically, we're going to cover some of what I call layers laws that relate to specific writing tips and techniques that you'll be using throughout this class, both on course papers and then also on the exams. And we'll start just kind of a general explanation of why I'm doing this and why I'm having you implement these laws in your paper. One part is that Soc 296 is in part about learning the history of theory, who said what did those ideas mean? But this class is also fundamentally about learning to convey yourself effectively in writing and through your writing. But I don't think the things that we're learning here are going to be isolated to this class. Instead, I think the tips you're going to learn, you can be able to apply those to many other classes you take on campus. And then also, they should be applicable to lots of other situations that you will encounter beyond Gettysburg. So in your career, you may be called upon to write reports, either about something you've done or doing research, say, for the company you're working for. And being able to convey yourself in effective ways is really important. And I should point out here that there can be a tendency to talk about people who are good writers and not good writers, as if it's kind of like part of their being. But the reality is, people learn to become good writers, and the more you practice at it, the better you will become. So it's a skill, and it's something that you can develop. Some of us might be well practiced in writing, so some of us are English majors, or had a lot of English classes. Writing can come very naturally. For other people, they haven't had a lot of experience, and so writing papers can be scary and feel overwhelming. But it gets easier over time. The more you practice, the easier it is. And the more that you can learn certain tricks and tips to help you write more effectively and also more efficiently, that will make writing a less scary prospect. So I think the things we're going to learn here are not just important for this class, but they're really important for this class, but they can also be used in other situations. All right, let's talk about some kind of the general context of writing. And the main thing to note is that when you're writing, you are conducting an act of altruism. You are writing for others, and you're trying to cater to their needs, not your own. And specifically, your job is to try to make your reader's life as easy as possible. So you don't want to have the reader have to do unnecessary work on your behalf or create situations that are overly complex for the reader. You want to do everything you can to make sure everything is lined up for the reader in a very effective and efficient way. And the reality is, even if you line up your argument really well in a really effective way, you're not making it so the reader has to do a lot of work. It's still possible for the reader to get off track and not follow what you're saying. I had one reviewer of my article who thought and interpreted what I was saying is the exact opposite of what I meant. And I thought I had outlined my argument very clearly. And even though I think I did this, still, this reader got the exact opposite impression that I was trying to make. So even under the best case scenario, readers may not always be able to understand exactly what you're saying. And then if you start adding in elements where they have to work, or if your paper is not organized effectively, one thing doesn't logically follow from another, they have to refer back to things that were, multiple pages in the past, the possibility for the readers not to understand what you're saying just grows exponentially. So when you approach writing, The thing that matters is what are you doing for your reader? Are you making their life easy? You're not writing for yourself. As, say, the case when you're writing your notes that you're making on a reading, or if you're writing in your diary, then you can do whatever you want. But if you're writing to an audience, you need to cater to an audience's needs. Another preliminary point to make is that you want to make a couple assumptions about your reader. The first one is that your reader is a generally knowledgeable and informed person, but they aren't in this class, and so they don't know what's going on in Soc 296. They don't know what we've covered. They may not know who the exact people we're talking about are. Okay, they're generally informed, but they don't know what's going on in this class. So you can't assume that they would know that Marx was or thought that capitalism produced alienating working conditions. Even though we know this to be the case, that's only because we've gone over this material. You can't assume that the reader has done the same thing. And so in this case, what you need to do then as a writer is that when you're talking about these kind of things, you need to make sure you're giving the reader enough context in order to understand what you're saying. You couldn't just say the assembly line produces alienating work conditions without explaining to the reader what alienation is, its different dimensions, and then explaining how and why assembly line work can produce those kind of alienating work conditions. You have to do all that work to set the reader up for the reader to be able to understand and appreciate what you're saying. And as we're going to see, many of the tips that we talk about, the laws that we talk about, they all deal with this issue of giving your reader enough context to understand and appreciate what you're saying. A lot of issues I see in the papers that I get from students is that what the students write makes sense to them, but that's because they have the background, or sorry, the specific knowledge of the cases that they're talking about and the context that they're talking about. But they know that, and then they assume the reader knows that as well. But you can't assume the reader has that. You have to furnish that context for the reader. Then that would allow the reader to appreciate the point that you're trying to make. And so I kind of went over this before. If you want to talk about alienation, you would need to explain what alienation is, and then how and why capitalism leads to those kinds of work conditions. Another assumption you want to make about your reader is that they are convincible if you can make a case. So they're not going to come in automatically buying what you're selling. They're also willing to entertain your argument. They're not going to be skeptical to the point where they're not even going to hear you out. You want to assume this person can be on board with me if I can show them how and why this is the case, and how and why they should come to see the world in the same way as I do. So the reader's convincible, but not convinced. But if you can then convince the reader will go along with what you're trying to say. All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to start going through what I call Lair's laws of effective paper writing.